Hello, welcome to the Marin Poetry Center reading series, which is produced in partnership with the Mill Valley Library. My name is Amanda Moore, and I'm the events coordinator for Marin Poetry Center. These readings happen mostly on the third Thursday of each month on Zoom for the time being, and are listed on both the Marin Poetry Center and Mill Valley Library websites. Look for information on May's reading, featuring Rick Barrett and Barbara Jane Reyes there, along with information on our newly revamped Literary Partners reading series, which will launch next Thursday at 5 p.m. Pacific time with a reading and conversation between Amy Nizuka-Matato and Dustin Parsons. We're very excited to bring that to you. Other upcoming special events include our high school award ceremony and anthology launch in late May, and an eco-poetry reading featuring poems of loss and resilience from 2 recent California anthologies. That will happen in June. Our partnership with Mill Valley Library also features a monthly book club, Building Bridges, which meets on the second Saturday of each month to discuss books by BIPOC poets. We just read Jericho Brown's The Tradition, and we'll meet again Saturday, May 8th, to talk about Kazim Ali's The Voice of Sheila Chandra. Again, information on these events, including how to register, is available on both the Mill Valley Library and Marin Poetry Center websites. These readings and offerings are free to the public, but I'd like to urge you to consider becoming a member of the Marin Poetry Center if you aren't already. Members support our community endeavors and fund events such as this tonight. If that isn't enough to entice you, we also host a summer traveling show for members to read in local libraries and bookstores, although that will be on Zoom as well this summer. And we publish a members anthology each year. Information on membership is available, you guessed it, on our website, which I'll post in the chat in a while. I usually begin these readings, as I will tonight, with an acknowledgement that the Marin Poetry Center operates on the territory of the Coast Miwok, who have been and are the stewards of the land we call Marin. And thanks to Zoom, I'm able to host this event from the traditional lands of the Ohlone and Ramaytush, who I also acknowledge. At our March reading, we took a moment to acknowledge the killings in Atlanta and to express our solidarity with the Asian American community. This month, this week, another murder, a horrifying video, and continued violence toward Black, Indigenous, Asian, Latinx, and other peoples of color and marginalized communities. Noting these realities is, of course, not enough, but ignoring what is happening isn't an option either. Poetry does not happen in a vacuum. Although it unfurls in our imaginations, it is created and consumed in this very real world that is as beset today by hatred, violence, inequality, and justice as it is beset by spring, its bounty and its beauty. I have to pause tonight to acknowledge these conflicting realities and consider what poetry and poetry organizations such as ours can do more actively to make this a safe and just world for everyone. We don't have many answers, but the Marin Poetry Center is committed to asking questions and creating poetry programs and events that bring us together. If you'd like to join us, I again urge you to become a member, or better yet, join our board and help create and support programming like community readings, poetry outreach programs, book clubs, and a growing roster of activities meant to foster connection, spark inclusive dialogue, and celebrate a wide range of poetic voices. I am thrilled this evening to welcome 2 poets whose work I greatly admire. Their strong senses of voice, of place, and of geography, from Jaswinder's Midwest, the place I was raised and that claims my cultural heart, to Rachel's South and her coasts, anchor their poems to a living, vital world and foster in me, their eager reader, a sense of recognition, exploration, and discovery. I'm going to introduce them both together right now, and they will read back and forth, have some conversation, and see where the evening takes them. The chat is open for your appreciation of their work during the reading, and you can post questions in the Q&A section that I'll present to them toward the end of the hour. We'll be posting links to our bookshop in the chat, so you have easy access to their books for purchase to further savor their words. Jaswinder Bolina's first book, Carrier Wave, won the Colorado Prize in 2006 and is a book full of wit and humor, like he is. A playfulness with language and words that continues to deepen in his subsequent collections, Phantom Camera, which won the Green Rose Prize in Poetry from New Issues, and the timely 44th of July, which came out in 2019 from Omnidon and has kept me company in these recent years of political turmoil and confusion. His omnivorous poems weave together complex ideas and shared human experiences, spirituality, pop culture, literature, work that broadly appeals and challenges a wide range of readers to tune their ears to his singular lexicon and voice. In addition to poetry, Jaswinder recently published a book of essays called Of Color, a deeply considered work on his experiences with race, poetry, writing, and academia. Some of its central questions have driven me back to Reginald Shepard's essays about identity and poetry in his collection Orpheus in the Bronx, and Jaswinder's deft movements between the personal and these larger cultural critiques is a new and essential part of the ever-evolving understanding of the lives we make inside and outside of art. Jaswinder currently teaches on the faculty of the MFA program in the creative writing at the University of Miami. Rachel Richardson is our second reader. A mutual friend, the beloved late writer Nina Riggs, first introduced me to Rachel Richardson's work, and I devoured her first book, Copperhead, from 2006, as one might a treasured book of myths or legends, hungry for the stories her poems tell of heroes and other lands. Her renderings and stories of the American South and its residents, from her family to Britney Spears and Leadbelly, among others, explore all kinds of regional and familial legacies, work that continues in her second collection, 100-Year Wave, where she navigates different waters. I'm sorry to have made that pun now that I made it, but I did. 100-Year Wave contains rich poems on motherhood, marriage, and whales, drawing connections between the speaker, her family, Sylvia Plath, Amelia Earhart, and even Captain Cook. I have long admired the collection's final poem, Shearwater, which compares a birthing, crowning baby to the birds that fly in the wake of ships. And I was thrilled when Rachel visited one of my classes and offered us several progressive drafts of the poem, illustrating her absolute brilliance when it comes to craft, construction, and imagery. Rachel is the co-founder and co-director with her husband, the poet David Roderick, of Left Margin Literature, an oasis of literary arts in Berkeley, California. Please join me in welcoming these two fantastic writers.
Thank you for having us, Amanda, and Marin Poetry Center. We're really delighted to be here.
Yeah, and thank you for that intro. That was really, really kind and generous. And it is, I wish I was actually there. Over my shoulder, I think may in fact be you may be able to see parts of Marin County. It's a poster I picked up when I lived in Berkeley many years ago. But thinking of the West Coast from here on the East Coast, and very glad to be with you. It's good to see you. It's been too long. There's a whole pandemic in between the times we've seen each other now. So thank you for having me, everybody.
You want to start? So maybe we should tell them what we're going to do.
Yeah.
So we had planned, Jaswinder and I have been talking about how to read together and what our newest work is, how we want to share, what we want to share tonight. And one thought we had is we've known each other for just about our whole adult lives. We met during our MFAs. So our poetries have grown in different directions, but they've often been in conversation or come back to some kind of a conversation with each other. And so we don't know each other's newest work. And we thought this would be a fun night to explore that and also to go back to some of our older stuff that speaks back and forth a little bit. And So our plan was to just go back and forth and read one poem each and not have a set list at all. We don't know what we're going to read. I have many options laid out in front of me, and we'll see. And just to try to respond to each other. So you get like the one night only engagement where none of us knows where this is going exactly.
Yeah, and I think we decided I would start because I think I wrote, the first poem. I feel like I started the poetry conversation by writing this poem, right? And then you wrote one, or did you write? You wrote yours after, I think.
Yeah.
So this is a very old poem for me. It's from here. It's from that first book that Amanda very kindly mentioned. I've not really done Zoom with a book in front of me, but I'm going to try this. Okay. So this is a poem that I wrote a very long time ago, and I think I'm almost certain it comes from an email, or like a lot of its text comes from an email that I wrote to you. Mm-hmm. And yeah, it's just an old poem that I'll probably be tempted to like edit as I read it because it's so old that I'm going to like find that I didn't like the way I wrote this or that. And I'll try not to screw it up because I haven't read it out loud in a long time. But it is called All the Hexagonal Faces Lilting from the Crowd, and it is based on an email to Rachel Richardson. I've taken a while to reply to your telegram of a fortnight ago. Weeks pass as if they're riding on trains. The air softens. Karen Siegel walks into the lounge. Speaking to her, I'm ravished by my voice. Does this ever happen to you? Echoes, a coffee can, a string. This probably never happens to you. I hadn't written, though I should have written. How is life? I prefer not watching the doorway. Certainly the weather. I've forgotten how to spell. I'm out late drinking lime rickeys. Often I repeat myself. The air softens. For this I apologize. I have been stolid, unrunning. Saying hello to me sounds awful. I don't believe in hell. How's your grandmother? Where are you now? Karen says hello. You should not believe her.
I can picture the sight of that poem. One of the things that was really exciting to me about you and your trajectory is you finished your MFA a year before me, and you published a book before just about anybody else we knew had. And so I kind of watched that progress during the workshops that we had together, and then as you kept writing in the year or two after. And I think I was figuring it out at the same time. I think that email was sent while I was on a trip to Louisiana, which I did a couple of times during my time at Michigan, to sort of do field work, to figure out like, what is my subject, where can I get stuff for poems.
Yeah, I was trying to remember too. I think it must have been between like year 1 and year 2 or something. It must have been a summer thing.
Maybe. And so, a couple of years later, I ended up going to a graduate program in folklore and at the University of North Carolina, which is where I ended up finishing this book. This is my first book, Copperhead, which draws on a lot of the folklore of the American South, which is where my family is from. And anyway, there's this sort of long story. So when Jaswinder mentions when you mentioned my grandmother, that's who I was visiting. And those are the stories I was trying to sort of mine and figure out what is it that is so tantalizing and also conflicted for me about that place. And so here's a poem that I wrote, not directly in response to you, but I think of it as being kind of in conversation. Field notes. My grandmother is not hurting anyone. Blackberry and dewberry vines will cover all this in a month or two. King's Jambalaya Cafe and the Lucky Lady Lounge. Thursday, I wrote, call Grand Hotel of Oils, AAA. My grandmother's gas checks come the first of the month. When you catch a snapping turtle, you have to cut the line. A book of climbers and trailers, and the magnolias just beg. One southeast to Marksville, I wrote. There's this, and then there's the other thing. Bees hiving. When you catch a snapping turtle, let it have the bait. Leadbelly sang himself off the prison farm, and look where it got him. Here, satin, tow truck, juke joint, bourbon, broken tree limb, iodized salt. She says, no one's lived in this cabin 20 years. The roof was falling even then. New Supermax brings jobs up the road in Evangeline Parish. New Walmart brings jobs 2 miles down. People want a better quality of life. And there's this, the other thing. The television's tuned to storms. Stopped and looked out because I thought I saw light, but again I wrote, there's none. Sweet tea at the Shreveport Club, crepe myrtle, hidden river. Barbed wire means no trespass. Who wants to see the menace every day? Armadillo armor when I went into the prison. I said I only brought poems. Vines holdfasts slither beneath strips of bark, says the book on shrubs and vines. Mrs. Nicholson has hired a guide to lead tours of her haunted house. My grandmother rocks in her chair, not hurting anyone. I am driving the levee. Cut it all loose for a turtle. Count yourself lucky with loss. 31 North to Lake Martin Road, Terrace Inn, 517-253-5274. A woman traveling alone, this and the other thing. Confederate ghost, electric chair, antiques. People have to earn their keep. Vines will cover all this in a month or two. My grandmother not hurting, my tracks on the road. Another flood warps the tongue and groove floorboards and the Lucky Lady Lounge. Walmart brings jobs 2 miles down. 49 North to Alexandria, then home, I wrote. The tour guide is the only one who believes in the ghost.
That is brilliant and quite a journey. The the trouble, of course, with arranging a reading like this is that I'm like processing your poem and then trying to figure out like instantaneously what the hell am I going to read next.
Right.
So Amanda, we tried, and we'll see how it pans out. Your poem made me realize that I actually have a couple of poems. Both it's a strange bit of timing, but each of my grandmothers died, while I was writing my first two books, and so I don't know the way in which your poem recollects her and a space and all that. The kind of instant connection for me is the poem that I wrote for my maternal grandmother, who passed away while I was working on this book, and I couldn't go to the funeral. I was kind of almost discouraged to go from going to the funeral. I had just been to Chicago to visit a few weeks prior, and we thought we had a bit more time, and we didn't. And so it was a very quick turnaround, and everybody just sort of said, you had a good visit, and maybe it's better just to leave it there. And so I ended up not being there, and I wrote this poem kind of in that sense of absence, and it's simply called Elegy. In sun, the sunburned skin sloughs off the sunburned shoulder. Most folks believe this is the body's slow mend. Most folks believe in the good yoke of the soul. I believe in autopsy lingo of natural causes should be replaced with of long-term exposure to the dim, unwavering radiation of the morning star. The evening they burn your body, I step into the garden and arrange a crooked line of bird baths to skip stones across until a bell tower tolls its 8 arguments against daylight, and the skyline illuminates, ragged and unmended, like a poem turned on its side. The evening they burn your body, I believe I'll step into the living room and be greeted by you, or by someone who could play you in a movie. The curtains are an aurora of earthly proportion. You don't exist. A flash igniting the paned glass is the silent lightning outrunning its noise. You're on fire. Read that poem in a very, very long time, but
that's really beautiful. You know, yeah, I had a similar story with the deaths of my grandmothers. Actually, one of them right after the first book and one of them during the second book. And that's sort of the transition into the second book for me. Oh, now I'm thinking about fire. Now I want to read about that. So by the way, in the chat, I don't know who's noticed this, if you have Jaswinder or Amanda or anyone else, this person who is posting as David Roderick is actually my daughter, who's 8, who's saying hello to everybody. that's the high.
I prefer to think that it's David. I prefer to think that it's David, actually.
He's not calling me mom.
Really excited.
Yeah, so there's family zooming happening. Okay, let's see. I think I will read something not directly connected to the elegy thing because I want to come to that a little bit later, but I'm going with your image of the fire. So this is a poem from my second book, which is called 100-Year Wave, and it's about it's about a history that I've inherited from my grandmother. So the other side of my family, who's not from Louisiana, is from Massachusetts, and they were involved in the whaling industry. And somehow when I was having my children, having babies, I felt this like very deep connection to this side of my family because it's my mother and my grandmother's lineage. So I started sort of looking into, I also felt sort of at sea and like this connection to being like completely adrift, metaphorically in my life. So, oh, you can't see those messages. Okay. So thanks. So this is a poem about the history of whaling, which I ended up studying like really nerdily for a long time as I was trying to figure out what poems I was going to write next. This is called A Brief History of the Whale Fishery. Elbow deep in the cool white, they flayed into strips, rolling the winnowing body as they unraveled her, and the sharks, smelling their work, circled and snapped. Unlucky men hot-stepping the planks, lucky men feasting on stars, misfits and criminals, whittlers, prophets, magicians, boys. In distress, smothering in fog or storm, they hoisted mattresses into the crow's nest and set them on fire. Goodbye, sleep. Melville, who are hearsed that die on the sea? If not the body itself lit through, if not the body, they would use their beds, the brightest thing to heave. If not the body itself a lighthouse, the body, such thin skin and gold beneath.
I mean, that book is so, I just reread it. I told you that. It is like an exquisitely like researched book. And I remember thinking to myself, how did Rachel get this deep into maritime stuff? And so the question I wanted to ask you was like, I couldn't remember, like, did you grow up like sailing, doing all of these things, or was this just like an interest you took later? Especially the whaling stuff was crazy. It was like so detailed, you know, and so knowing. And so when did that all happen?
Well, I am not a sailor. I get totally seasick. But a lot of my family is, and a lot of them took on that particular part of our inheritance, and like they're really comfortable at sea, and they do a lot of sailing in various ways. But that was not something that I took on. But my grandmother was just this repository of family documents. The negative way of framing it would be that she was kind of hoarding things, but everyone gave the stuff to her, right? Because they knew she cared about it. She wanted to preserve it. And she just, I had a close relationship with her. We would visit her in Massachusetts every summer, and I grew up here in California. And she just had these stories to tell. And her house, history it's a funny thing to think of it to me as something that is separated from us in any way, because her house was that. We lived in an 1850s house that had very, very little changed. I mean, there was like a microwave, but it was perched on the 150-year-old stove, you know, and there are like shells that people had written their names on from going to Horseneck Beach together in like 1910. And, you know, just the history of the family was very present. And so I'd always known those stories, and I had a lot of people who like to tell stories. So there's in my family, so there's a lot of sort of passing down of lore. But then, I don't know. I mean, actually, a lot of it came from reading Moby Dick. And I gotta give a plug for if you're in a sort of like dazed state for a long period of time, like, I don't know, recovering from surgery or something, or like being a new parent and not getting enough sleep and being kind of like delirious all the time. Moby Dick is the perfect book to read. I know that sounds counterintuitive, but the thing is, you don't have to know where you are in the plot.
Yeah,
it's just, you're just washed over in this language. And so I had read it before and I loved it. And then I listened to it actually as audiobook. And I just felt like completely overcome with this language and the imagery of the sea, which kind of got me back into my own family's story. And so asking a lot of questions. Plus, I mean, the fact that my grandmother died literally 6 weeks after my daughter was born, it just felt like there was this like very strong sort of generational passage that was happening. And a lot of stories were being told about her and her life because of her death. So they were all being sort of handed to me.
I mean, the Moby Dick connections, that's interesting because I don't think when we knew each other at Michigan, I had read Moby Dick yet. I hadn't either. I read it. I majored in philosophy in college. I mean, you know, and then I went to a PhD program in English, and I finally sat down and read Moby Dick because I was like, I can't get a PhD in English. I'm not having read Moby Dick. And yeah, holy smokes. Like I was blown away by how much I just loved that book. And I got it like almost instantly. And, you know, it had become such a cliche in some respects. I don't know, like in my imagination, you know, but brilliant. And then rereading your stuff, it took me to a lot of different places. And so I'm trying to decide which to read next. I have like a few poems that have references to the sea, but then that last thing you said about kind of passing things down from generation one to the next, I think I'm going to read a new poem, which I think I've only read once publicly, and so it's about kind of that passing things down, and it's the last poem in the manuscript that I just am finishing right now. That is kind of finished, and so let me. Hopefully, Amanda, you can all see me, so I can look at this other document and. Let me know if, I'm good. Yeah. Okay. So I can bounce this other screen. This is a poem, I guess, that is about kind of wanting to pass things down, but maybe not being so good at it. It's called Lines Composed Upon Changing a Diaper. Marin upstairs is anxious for an update from the extended care facility where her husband is dying. 4 blue macaws bustle through the airspace above the neighborhood. Her footfalls go cursing from room to room. Here, the toddler testifies no poops, but the toddler is lying. I tell him there are 9 spiders living inside the walls for every person in a building. They spin their twilight colonies in an alternate dimension rippling beneath the drywall. Termites romancing in the joists. We worry about so much more than ourselves, I tell him. But I tell him it'll all be all right, because it'll all be all right, though not all of us will live long enough to agree. One night, we hear Marion's husband has broken back into himself through a skylight in his own mind, demanding to see his wife again, demanding the nurses release him again, demanding a Reuben from a diner in Brooklyn folded in 1996. But by morning, he's ghosted back into his framework. From the interior view, birth is exactly as inevitable as death. I can't sketch the schematics of why, baby, but I remain devoted to my tasks, wiping you clean, buttoning you up, answering your every complaint in a grammar you don't understand. So I guess I moved into fatherhood at some point in the last couple of years, and that, in spite all of my best efforts, has infiltrated the poems. And probably to explain some of the things occurring in that poem, I live in Miami, as Amanda mentioned, and so there actually are macaws that fly over. They're gigantic, and they fly. I don't think they're from here. I think people like brought them as pets, and they've, kind of taken root. So yes, I've changed a lot of diapers in the last couple of years, and especially during the pandemic. And that poem came, and yeah, it's one of the weirdest things, kind of suddenly being thrust in a position of like needing to know things and pass things down, and not having any of those that kind of wisdom seemingly available to one. It's an odd new experience. But anyway, that's a new poem.
Yeah. Oh, I'm so glad you're reading those. I want to hear the fatherhood poems, or the since becoming a father poems, wherever they go, whether they're about fatherhood directly or not. Okay, so that leads me to something clearly paralleled. This is a poem called "The Wind and the Rain," which I wrote, I guess, a while ago now. Probably my daughter was, I don't know, 2 or 3, but I was thinking back to when she was first born, when I lived in Greensboro, North Carolina. And yeah, I don't know. This is, it brings in the mutual friend who introduced us, Amanda, so that also feels fitting to tie those threads together. Okay, The Wind and the Rain. In those first weeks, first because she was newly arrived, and so the scene had reset as unfamiliar, a blank line, even though of course the days are continuous, and for others it was the middle of a project at the office, or a round of blood work, or simply another February. In those days, weeks, her first of feeling wind on her face, and her mother's, my hand at her forehead, shielding the skin from rain, the neighbors had mostly taken down the lit balls that blazed in trees from Thanksgiving through the darkest days, and wet yellow leaves clogged the gutters, slicking sidewalks. Someone had given us a fish hat, bit of whimsy, a chartreuse knit whose softness I liked and which seemed right for someone so newly born, that jarring color and the fin swaying atop her head. She was bunched to my chest, so it swayed at my heart. Little fish, swept along the sidewalks of a pallid college town, raining and between rains. Then bursts of sun from breaches in the pillowed clouds. Her mouth opened in an asymmetrical yawn because of a paralyzed lip. Fairly common, the doctor said, and after she learns your expressions, you'll only see it when she cries. Open, shut. Cry, be calmed. She wriggles into spring, the days get longer, and probably it is here in the story that down the street, a cluster of Nina's cells begin to mutate, though it will be another year before she feels the lump. Shakespeare's fools always let us in on the truth of the scene when the dramatic figures are too busy, caught in their morning plans, suiting up in the handmaid's skirts, writing a love note in a disguised hand. The way Feste, under clear skies after the royals' double wedding, skips off stage, singing, and the rain, it raineth every day.
Yeah, this is tough going back and forth because I don't want to read anything right now. I want to take a minute. And when you're sitting at the reading, you get to take a minute. And so I mean, it's kind of great too, because I'm like super focused, but I'm also then super focused. And then I'm like, oh, what am I going to do? But I do notice that the sun is setting in California as both your and Amanda's screens light up beautifully. I'm going to read a poem called "The Tallest Building in America" for reasons related to that poem that I don't think I need to delve into a ton. But this one I wrote actually 10 years ago when I was in the poem, it's my sister, and I should mention that I don't actually have any siblings, but in my family's culture, your first cousins, and this is certainly true with this particular cousin, you call them your brothers and sisters, and I'm very close with some of those first cousins, and one of them, who is very much my older sister in every way that we mean that word, was diagnosed with breast cancer 10 years ago. She's doing great now, and I'm happy to mention that. But this was a poem that I wrote back then when all of that was very new and scary and all of those things. It's called The Tallest Building in America. And the date is mentioned there, 2011, because there are political figures here that will only make sense in 2011 in terms of their positions and things like that. The tallest building in America. In the season of her first cancer, my sister looms over lampposts, broadcast antennas, over cicadas in flight. News helicopters chuckle below her, and I can see her from every corner druggist. I can see her from the pier at Pratt Street Beach, from the Botanic Gardens in Glencoe, from every expressway and ring road. I can see her from Ohio. Or maybe it's her tumor. Yeah, her tumor is the tallest building in America, rising into her chest like a spire shoved into the troposphere. I call it her first cancer because any cancer that isn't the last cancer is an only fleetingly crowned behemoth crowding her skyline. Any new cancer will be much, much taller. So the next cancer becomes the tallest building in America. Every road goes there. When I think this way of the epic encroaching future, I become the tallest building in America, able to see over quivering horizons. The president must feel this too when our civic maladies metastasize into national disasters. And when he does, he's the tallest building in America until his agenda is thwarted by the majority whip. So the Speaker of the House is certain he's the tallest building in America. But the Fox newsroom overlooking the Avenue of the Americas is taller. For years, the kitschy white folks who yammer there tell me Osama bin Laden is the tallest building in America, and it's best to throw boots through his windows until the weather gets in, until his rebar corrodes, until he teeters into the sea. When this happens, the headquarters of the Central Intelligence Agency in Langley, Virginia becomes the tallest building in America, though the Chamber of Commerce is much, much taller. It worries China is rising monstrous and tall, but I remember when stern Russia lumbered larger, and I'm nostalgic then for our antique enemies. Nostalgia always has been the tallest building in America. But later, I'm walking through the elastic shadows of Fullerton Avenue to the Lincoln Park Zoo to wonder at the hopeless daffy giraffes. Or I'm in the signature room of the Hancock Building for a bourbon alone, and I think, no. Above all of these, my sister is the tallest building in America. But all her joists are showing. Scaffoldings hem her. Work lights scream from floor to ceiling gaps in her where windows should go. But there aren't any windows. So the monsoons of autumn roil clear through, and from this height, the other buildings are small. The people beneath them smaller. Their other concerns minute. Their other catastrophes even smaller. Those other folks, remote little lymph nodes about their diligent business, their other lives enduring in a sanguine nation, in a small and temporary country.
I love that poem so much. I'm glad you read it.
Thank you. Yeah.
Really beautiful. Where do I go from there? I don't know. Maybe Google's the tallest building in America.
I went for height. You could go for depth.
Well, or like virtual.
Yeah.
Like we don't have to have the single building anymore, right? Now it's all across the kind of virtual sphere. It doesn't have to have. Yeah, I don't know. It's a different plane. Okay, so this is a poem meditating on the ubiquity of Google and of the internet before COVID. So it's even bigger now. but so what precipitated this poem, or what I was doing that led to it, was trying to Google to find out what are the things that we ask the most, that we ask Google to answer for us. What are the questions that get asked the most frequently in, at that time. This was, I think, 2017. And some of those questions are in this poem. Questions. If there's one true thing, it's that Google will make money off us no matter what. If we want to know what percentage of America is white, as it seems we do, what percentage of the population is gay, as it seems we do, what percentage of the earth is water, the engine is ready for our desire. The urgent snow is everywhere, is a line by Edna St. Vincent Millay, and many have asked, apparently, where am I right now? Also, when will I die? Do you love me? Maybe up there, generating high cost per click, but not as high as how to make pancakes. What time is it in California? So many things I wanted to ask you now that you're gone and your texts bounce back to me undeliverable. Praise to the goddess of the internet search who returns with her basket of grain, 67,000 helpful suggestions to everything we request. How to solve a Rubik's Cube. What to do when you're bored. How old is the earth? How to clear cache? What animal am I? Why do we dream? Where are you now? Come back.
I still don't know how to solve a Rubik's Cube. I've looked it up. But I couldn't look because it felt like I was cheating, so.
I just take off the stickers.
I know, that's how it's done. But your children are watching.
My 10-year-old can just about do it. She's like really diligently figuring it out. And yeah, and then there's the Rubik's Cubes for the people who solve the 5x5. There's like the 8x8s. They're horrible, but she's on her way to that. That's
extraordinary because I only looked to see how many moves it would take. Like I was so completely lost. I was like, what am I aiming for here? And yeah, I can get like 3 sides. That's about it. There's something about the corners. I know there's something about the corners, but I don't know what it is.
These are the things the internet can now tell us, right? We didn't have these answers in the 80s when we were trying to do them.
We had none of that. Actually, you know what? That makes me think I'm going to read a poem, not about the 80s in that case. I'm going to read a poem about the 90s, maybe. Yeah, I'm going to read a poem about the 90s, which... just because why not? It's also getting late and I don't even know how much longer we're going to go. So I'm going to read this poem that I have never read out loud anywhere. It's new. I may screw it up, but I'm not that new, but whatever. I've never read it out loud. It's called Palace of Amenhotep, and it is based on a half-true and otherwise completely made-up story. All right. No pharaoh does miss his kitty any more than I miss the dive bars of Chicago. 1998, wood-paneled, red-lettered, dank and cozy as a confessional, with a single knobbed television in one corner and a geriatric and a respirator ad on mute between innings. Then I couldn't imagine my face attached to a breathing machine. I'd say to the cigarette machine, yanking hard and outbounded a pack of Camels, but I could have imagined it. If bleeding youth could have permitted more than obsessing over other people's underpants, primetime dramaturgy, shooting old crows until 4 a.m. home to the cat I called Amenhotep, and not in honor of the guy. Good old Amenhotep would have gnawed my nose clean off if she'd caught me in a back alley instead of our great apartment, enflanneled as it was then by loneliness, for a whole year that lasted 7 years, so I felt much older by the end of it, but not any wiser. Amenhotep, ever indifferent to my every want and affection is what I wanted most to give as the century surrendered itself like a dynasty into a perfect ruin where I am to this day, gutted, wrapped, and doggedly intact as a cat in a cat-shaped coffin. That's my latest 90s poem.
Oh my gosh, that's so good. The year that lasted 7 years, is that this past year? Or how long?
Oh yeah. Yeah, actually, it came back. that sensation came back all of a sudden in 2020.
Okay, well, I'll match that with a poem that I wrote. This is the newest one I have tonight. It's one of my newest poems that I've written too, and I don't think I've read it out loud before either. It's also sort of about the 90s and now. It's about this thing that, our children now think a phone is like this device that does everything, right? They don't, like, the word telephone means a totally different thing to them. But my kids are of the age where they have learned to play the game telephone. So I realized, like, it doesn't have the same, they don't get that that's what that means, right? Like holding the phone up to your ear, what you hear. So anyway, I was playing with that. Telephone. Warm movement on skin, voice brought inside my ear as if through that cord I used to weave around my index finger, ring finger, across wrists to cuff me to its sound, its intelligible replication of the human voice. The patent, device that can fuse across space when two are too far apart to be heard directly. I twined that cord to my arms, wrapped myself within the sound. Speak, and assemble the parts that bring her, transmitter, receiver, ringer. My daughter, unknower of the telephone, cups her hand against my ear, whispers a sentence, chain I am supposed not to break, but pass unharmed through my body to another ear and across until it comes back to her. Replication, microphone, earphone, delivered unto her body by warm breath fogging the ear, and its mangled arrival, heap of syllables ruptured and bent out of order, everyone so near and laughing now at how far, how indirectly the replication imagined what she said.
That's a lot of fun. They don't know. They've never heard a dial tone in their lives, have they? They never will.
Well, we got a landline just kind of for that reason. Like,
oh, really?
Total nostalgia on our part. Although they think it's so cool and weird to call their friends on it. A few other people have landlines that they can, like, call each other's. But the phone ringing in the house is so weird. I know. We have one, but only our respective parents know that phone number, and then, like, the random telemarketers who call. Amanda, I feel like we're getting kind of long in the tooth. Maybe I'll just read one more maybe, and then kind of wrap it up. I have no idea, Rachel, what I'm going to read. I'm thinking of, like, I have poems about telephones. Do you have another poem about being a parent? Oh, parenthood poem. Yeah, something new. Something new. Okay. The tricky thing about doing this is, like, doing a reading this way, it presumes that one has, like, a perfect memory of one's poems. I do not. I don't even know, like, I have to, like, look at the table of contents to remember what the hell I wrote. So a parenting poem. Yeah, I got one or two of those in here somewhere. How about, actually, I'm going to read something that is not a parenting poem. And this is, it's more about the opposite. It's actually a poem about my dad. And there's something, like, veering completely off the idea of, like, the poems talking to each other, but maybe not, because this is a poem about the past, a past that, like, I can't get back to, as the kid of the person described here. But I want to read it because one of the people mentioned here, actually, I just found out yesterday, one of my dad's great old friends, he passed away about a week ago. And I wrote this poem a while back, and I, didn't
think that when I mentioned him in the poem, I didn't think that would be the case. And it is about sort of a different era and a different space. And it actually is, I think it's going to be the title poem of the new collection. And it's called English as a Second Language. We came upon a line of English, eating dog, we thought, on plump bread, steamed and slathered in a drab yellow chutney from a cart in the Kew Gardens. Wankers, they looked to us, offending nature. But we asked the dogwalla for one apiece. Me, your gyan uncle, and the elder Sahota, who held up 7 fingers, then pointed to the sky. A coat of theirs he'd broken. The dogwalla just shook his head, counted our shillings, and surrendered 3 green black glass bottles of 7-Up, 3 warm logs of aluminium. In 1967, you could hear a song by the Beatles on anybody's radio. But what did the Beatles know about us? Huddled together in that conspiracy on a bench beneath a kind of tree I'd never seen before. Anyway, we were young and having fun. The shit-eating grin on Gyan's face as we brought the dogs to our mouths. When you sack the wanker's estate, you have to eat from the wanker's kitchen. You dress in his top coat and drink his gin. You set his horses free and drive them home through the rain. You see, we weren't afraid. We didn't come here to become like them. We came here to plunder. I'm going to stop there.
That's great. Thank you. Well, I guess I'm responsible for ending this then, being the last poem. So I'll read a short one. You said something about a past you can't get back to. So that is this also. It's an elegy. And again, for our friend Nina Riggs, who wrote a really beautiful book as she was dying, which I recommend to everybody. This is called Elegy to the Sound of Your Name. Not that I'll never hear it again, your N, that soft center like a hammock leading to the smaller N, the sigh. Your name is the same in 5 languages, and all the women sharing it traipse around the earth, and people call out for them. It can't be made to sound like keening, no matter how slowly wailed. Your name, sweet swing of it, in out like a tide, and the little boats have all been pulled in for the season.
Well, I will at least say my thanks to her for somehow bringing all of us together in this.
I know, this is, the best lives do that, right? Mm-hmm. They continue to bring people together over like long after, so yeah. And I think I keep going back to her. So she died in 4 years ago, right, Amanda? 2017. And I was writing these poems a lot, that at that time and 2 years ago, I've kind of moved now into some other stuff, but it does feel like this sort of echo. I mean, she's the first very close peer that I've had who's died. And so it has felt like a kind of parallel in my life in so many ways and so many possibilities. It's become kind of a reminder to get back to writing and a touchstone. So.
Well, thank you both for weaving such magic together and going back and forth. We have time for questions, which you can put in the Q&A section down in your Zoom screen. And maybe while we're waiting for some questions from the audience, I can ask you, both of you were talking about your time together in MFA land, which was so long ago. Do you share drafts now? Do you go back and forth? Or was this the first time you were hearing some of this new poetry from one another?
Totally the first time. I share drafts with like almost nobody. I have no idea if the stuff I'm writing is any good. And I kind of wish I maybe did do that, but then I don't know. I don't, but I'm like thrilled to hear the new stuff, Rach. I have not heard any of the new work. There were a few poems obviously in there that I recognized from the books, but not the new work.
Yeah, it's so great to hear yours too. So no, we haven't shared drafts, but and I don't do it with very many people anymore either. I think I don't know, I feel more delicate now or something. Not that I can't handle criticism, but that I don't want to lose the forward momentum. And so I don't want to do it till I'm near the end of a project. Actually, the sort of sharing of these drafts or these poems that I've been writing for the last few years, well, you all are the first to hear most of them. A couple of them have been published, but most of them have just been sort of sitting here in my little word hoard until I get ready to put them in a book. So I feel, sort of protective of that work until I really know what it is. So maybe this is marking a little bit of a transition where I'm like going public a little bit more now and I'm ready to share. But yeah, I mean, Jaswinder was a really helpful critic to me from very early on, though. Yeah, I don't know. That's still, those voices still kind of echo, you know?
Yeah, you think of the people who you would like to reach or impress or somehow, like, for lack of a better word, please with a poem. You know what I mean? And yeah, I like the way you put that too about like, I do feel more protective of the momentum of the work until like it's really ready, until I think it's ready to go out, you know. And I'm actually I'm no longer as precious about like making it better. Like if it goes out and if it doesn't work, I'll happily just throw the poem away. You know what I mean? Like I'd almost rather just do that than which I'm grateful none of my students are listening to this because they'd be like, wait, you told us to revise. But I do revise a ton. It takes me so long to write a poem now compared to what it used to. And that might be part of it too. Like it used to, back in the MFA industrial complex, it was like, you know, crank out a poem a week. You were just going. And now it can take me a month, sometimes 6 weeks, 2 months, 3 months working on the same poem. And when it's ready, I feel like it's ready. And but those voices are those kind of sensibilities are all built in back there because, you know, you were in my workshops, you were a friend of mine, you were somebody whose voice is like still, baked in along with some of our good friends from there in Michigan. Many of them are still there.
Well, and when you start seeing other people's concerns close up, it kind of expands what you think a poem can do, right? Like just like your interest in like in humor and in the sort of juxtaposition of statements without like trying to lyricize them or something. That was really helpful for me. I needed to pull back on some of that stuff and explore a range, like an emotional range beyond just sort of like somber. And I think I've expanded a lot of what I want to do from reading, you know, your work and some other people whose work and processes I've seen along the way too.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
I think now as a writer, I have a lot more first drafts that I don't bother to work on. Like when you're 24 and you're in your MFA and you're like, you've written a draft, you're like, well, workshop is next week, I should work on it and then turn it in, right? Everything seems like it has a possibility. And I think I recognize earlier now, like what is just sort of the practice and, or that I can't see anything in it now and maybe I can come back to it in a few years or something, but I don't bother to ever take it out of the notebooks for quite a long time. I mean, there's a few where I recognize the thing that's happening, the little spark in it right away, and I work on those. But I think I write a lot more first drafts and then maybe need to go through a little bit less of the drafting process now than I did, you know, whenever that was 17 years ago.
We have a question in the chat. What are you reading? So you both talked about projects that you're writing and these books that are taking shape on your hard drives. What are you reading right now?
I'm like all over the place. We're actually in my office room, and so the books are there. I just reread 100-Year Wave, but just earlier tonight, I was reading Magical Negro by Morgan Parker. I'm reading Madeline Fitch's novel Stay and Fight, which is brilliant. And Morgan's book is brilliant too. I'm also reading simultaneously this book by my editor on Of Color, of my essay collection, Daniel Levin Becker, who's this brilliant writer who has written this entire book about the Oulipo, this group of writers originating in France. And with it, there's he edited an anthology of the Oulipo work. And so, you know, I cycle through. When I get bored with one, I pick up the other, and not bored, but like, you know, when I just am in the mood for one versus the other. So those are some of the books that I'm reading. And then of course the ones I'm teaching. So I just finished, whatever that means, teaching Matthew Aldsman's book, Contradictions in the Design, which is a spectacular collection. So yeah, kind of, that's a bunch that I'm reading right now.
Yeah, I could say the same. I just read 44th of July again, by Jaswinder Bolina. It's great. And other than that, actually, I think I'm reading more prose than poetry lately. I am, during National Poetry Month, going back to this book that I love, that I want to recommend to everybody, by Inger Christensen, called Alphabet. It's like my spring book and my like birth of babies book. I give it to everybody who has a baby when I need a baby shower gift. But it's sort of a Fibonacci sequence in book length. And it's so beautiful and weird and political, and it's just fantastic. And it's translated by Susanna Need into English, and the translation somehow is, I mean, I don't know about the fidelity to the original, but I mean, it must have great fidelity to the original, but also like the difficulty of that translation is so amazing to think about because of the form. Natalia Ginsburg, really great essayist who I've been reading a lot. Lauren Groff's Florida, I keep coming back to. Speaking of your landscape, I love her sort of new Southern Gothic thing that she's doing in that place. And I don't know, I'm interested in these unapologetic sort of, in some ways unlikable voices now. And I'm trying to figure out, like, how do I let myself have that a little bit more, just be like a little rougher on the page. So yeah, I'm finding more of it in novels and in essays than in poetry. Oh, Ross Gay, I keep coming back to him too, although I'm more the essays than the poems right now. So yeah, I don't know. I also have like 20 books on my nightstand, so I go in and out of things.
Great, thank you. We do have time for just one last question that comes through the Q&A portal. This is from Dave, and he says that he read Rachel has done some work bringing poetry workshops into prisons, and he's curious whether that experience has influenced your aesthetic or made you think or write differently about contemporary social issues.
Whether it has influenced my aesthetic. Well, certainly it's made me think differently about social issues. It's made me think differently about prison. I did that early on, mostly in my poetry writing life. Actually, while I was at the University of Michigan, there's a big prison creative arts program there that sends students, undergraduate and graduate students, into prisons, and there are a lot of them in Michigan, to do workshops with inmates. And so I did that during the whole time that I was a student. And that in itself was a really interesting education, like to go to a prison one day and do a workshop, and then to go into my fancy workshop in Angel Hall with the big columns and, you know, the marble like front steps. And to think about the conversations that are being had in each room and the concerns that are being brought up. I think it made me want to make sure that my poetry has a kind of civic relevance, and that I am not writing to just some sort of cloistered, smaller audience, that I think about how I write to the public and how I participate in that life too. So I've pretty much left academia. I occasionally sort of moonlight, but I now work in mostly a community setting, teaching in continuing studies kinds of classes, or really community arts classes, through an organization that my husband and I founded, which intends to kind of do that too, to sort of broaden the artistic community and the group who can seriously engage with the arts in a like a critical and supportive environment. And so I guess maybe it's influenced my the way that I engage daily, with it and the work that I do more than my own poetics. I think those were already kind of inclined toward the political and the civic and the social, but it certainly highlighted some of that.
Good, thank you so much. I would love to continue talking. I know Jaswinder has some poker to play, and Rachel has bedtime to attend to for the daughters who have disappeared from the chat. So I'd just like to thank you both so much for being here. I'd like to thank our literary partners at the Mill Valley Library, especially Angie Brenner and Julianne Randolph, who did all of our tech tonight, and to those of you who've joined us. We look forward to seeing you at a program soon. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Being here. Thanks for having us.